Intimidated, harassed, and sometimes even targeted and killed. These are some of the ordeals journalists face in an effort to get information out to the public. Today, we take a closer look at what press freedom means and what journalists go through to get us news every day. Welcome to Our Voices. I am Salem Solomon, sitting in for Haiti Adams Fitzpatrick. And here with me are my colleagues Ayen Hadiza Carey, and Ayen Bior.
Welcome back, Salem. While we'll be looking at some of the most difficult places for journalists, we'll also see some rays of hope on the continent where daring reporters are making a difference.
My home country, Eritrea, happens to hold the record for highest number of jailed journalists in sub-Saharan Africa. Many of these reporters have been held for more than a decade and denied access to lawyers and family members. Despite positive news in 2018, as Ethiopia and Eritrea declared an end to a 20-year war, Eritrea continues to hold the unenviable title of the worst country in Africa for jailing journalists.
She remembers vividly the day and even the time on the clock when her world changed. On February 14, 2009 at 4 p.m., Yirgalem Fissaha was working in a radio station in Asmara, Eritrea, when she and her colleagues were ordered to attend an impromptu meeting. The station, Radio Bana, which broadcasts educational programs, had been accused of disloyalty, and about 30 journalists were arrested and taken for interrogation. She was held in the prison Adi Abeito, just outside the capital city.
I thought because they've already asked me so many questions, things would be cleared up and then they were going to send me home. That was what I was thinking. I was so confident about my innocence that I was worried about whoever did what they were asking about, and I was worried for them.
For the next 6 years, she was held in solitary confinement, endured beatings and endless interrogation. She and other Radio Bana journalists were accused of communicating with an opposition radio station.
I didn't even know that the radio station I was being asked about existed. I think eventually that even the people that were imprisoning us started to understand that we didn't have anything to do with this radio station. But because they weren't courageous enough to tell us that we were mistakenly imprisoned, they started asking us about our thinking and even writings that we had in the past.
Yirgalem's case is not isolated. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, 16 journalists are currently being held in prison in Eritrea, making it the worst jailer of journalists in sub-Saharan Africa. Much of the free press in the country was shut down in September 2001 during a crackdown when 7 newspapers were shut down and numerous journalists arrested. Temesgen Debesai, a former anchor for state-run Area TV, now living in London, said that inside the country it was impossible to report on or advocate for jailed journalists.
To this day, nobody knows where they are, whether they're alive or not, but this is not the kind of story that you're not allowed to cover. It was just brushed under the carpet and no one was ever to hear about them again.
There has been advocacy for some of these imprisoned journalists. Seyum Tsahaye, a photojournalist, has been imprisoned since 2001. His niece has taken up his cause and founded an organization, One Day Seyum, advocating for his release. Today, there are no independent media outlets operating in the country.
There is no room for maneuver. If you want to survive, you have to be able to stick to the rule book, which is sing praises, say that everything is fine, everything is hunky-dory, everything is rosy, and that's it.
Exiled Eritrean journalists in France, for example, have founded Radio Arena, which relies on contributing journalists from across the globe and information secretly relayed from the country to produce news programs in Tigrinya and Arabic, which are broadcast by satellite and shortwave radio.
For us, it's been almost 20 years since it's been formally forbidden to express our ideas. And within the past 20 years, we have forgotten that it is our right to express ideas.
So the people that you saw, like Yirgalem and Temesgen, are the ones that were exiled, and some of exiled Eritrean journalists that you saw are lucky enough to tell their experiences and stories, but there are some that have disappeared in Eritrea and don't have the same opportunity. And yes, Eritrea is the extreme example what happens when the government dismantles and crushes the press freedom. But across the continent, there are other cases of eventual attacks on the press. What is it like in your home country, Hadiza?
You know, when you speak about slain journalists, the one person that comes to mind is Dele Giwa, Nigeria's Dele Giwa. He was a profound journalist, and he was known for exposing corrupt and illegal practices of the government. Unfortunately, you know, he lost his life at an early age of 39 via a letter bomb. And, you know, there were talks about the government being involved, the fact that he was about to expose some of their dealings, something really, really controversial.
Was his killing investigated?
It appears it wasn't investigated, but it doesn't seem like anyone has been brought to book yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes things can shift in terms of press freedom. I mean, in Burundi, since 2005, we saw a very vibrant free flow of information since the peace accord happened in 2005. But it quickly shifted in 2015 when there was a attempted coup d'etat that failed. Many media were seen as very biased, and they actually had different tensions between each other, and this resulted into them being destroyed, burned down, and about a dozen of them actually being banned by the government. So it was very unfortunate to see this shift that happened very quickly when, you know, you have a society with free flow of information, and all of a sudden people, you know, just there's no media.
Just like in Nigeria, Nigerians don't have a lot of faith on CNN reporting, and they prefer other media outlets like Voice of America, BBC, Al Jazeera, and so on. And this is because they feel the people on the ground think that CNN is trying to push America's agenda.
Yes, that's right. And also, it was very unfortunate also to see it in Turkey happening in 2016 when the attempted failed coup d'etat that happened there. They weren't trusting the media anymore because they thought they were biased. President Erdogan actually used that opportunity to shut down about 100 media outlets. And so it's very unfortunate when people don't trust the media anymore, and also governments taking that opportunity to sniff the media when crises happen. So I think that, in my opinion, when there is crises in countries, media really have to be really careful not to fall into the trap and allowing government to use those circumstances to sniff them out.
But it's not all doom and gloom. I mean, the Gambia coming out of long years of dictatorship with Yahya Jammeh, and now the freedom of expression and press is beginning to return to some sort of normalcy. And the new government is modernizing their media law and allowing greater freedom and private media organizations to for reporters to return to their home country and practice the profession.
We've seen the same surge in optimism in Sudan. After Omar al-Bashir fell after 30 years of the regime in Sudan, we've seen reporters tell us that it's been much easier for them to get visas, to work as a journalist in Sudan. This is almost unheard of. State-run Sudan TV was seen interviewing critics of the government. That is also unprecedented. But it wasn't always like that. In fact, Reporters Without Borders said that between December and February, during this current revolution, Sudan arrested 79 journalists, including the editor-in-chief of Al Tayar. We hope that this new surge of optimism will stay when it comes to freedom of the press. But right now, it just remains to be seen. We remain optimistic, cautiously optimistic.
Yes, that's right. I mean, we also know that sometimes, you know, these leaders on the continent, they can seem very harsh on the media. We also know that sometimes the media can be detrimental. I mean, President Magufuli of Tanzania says that, you know, his media oftentimes just broadcasts negative things all the time, and that whenever there's a positive thing, there's always a narrative change to make sure that things are, you know, doom and gloom. But let's take a look at one of the statements he made in one of his speeches.
We will not allow Tanzania to be a dumpster for words to incite. Under my authority, that will not happen. There are two newspapers in particular, and everything they publish is pure incitement. Whenever something is said, they alter it and change it to something else. I said this, and I want them to hear me. Their days are numbered.
In this particular speech, he actually went on to give example about the Rwandan genocide and how the media actually was very detrimental in causing people to kill each other. And so the point was made pretty well, and so we can see that the media can play a very big negative part.
Magufuli has taken a really, wrong, negative direction when it comes to the press, unfortunately. But to the point about, the press could be used against people. Yes. What we're rightly pointing out the fact that, the press and there are challenges faced by journalists. It's important to remember that the onus is also on reporters and media houses, that they practice the highest standards of ethics and integrity and professionalism. And sadly, in recent years in Africa, we've seen there have been instances where the press tarnished their reputation through unethical acts. And examples we can think of is in countries like Uganda and Cameroon, for instance. We have seen reporters and newspapers even publishing names of suspected homosexuals, for instance, and in some cases even blackmailed people who they threatened to publicly out in countries where being gay is illegal. And these have been high-profile cases, but other cases that we can think of are media bribery, where instances of media using their platform to promote racial or ethnic hatred. And so these are cases that really harm all journalists and give ammunition to politicians, like what you heard with Magufuli, to silence journalists.
That's right.
This is true, but we've also seen journalists who are objective and who are responsible get put behind bars.
That's true.
And this happens over and over and over again in Zambia. The Independent Broadcasting Authority there suspended Prime TV's license for 30 days. They said that they were being unbalanced and unprofessional. Amnesty International, on the other hand, said that it was clearly intended to send a chilling message that journalists need to self-censor or face dire consequences. That happens over and over again, I think.
That's right, yeah. As a matter of fact, Nigeria's President Buhari has been accused of trying to muzzle journalists, especially the fact that he comes from a military background. I remember earlier this year, the Daily Trust was shut down by the military, and the reason they gave was because they feel like the journalists are divulging classified information on Boko Haram.
And it's all about stifling freedom of expression, I think.
Yeah.
Well, speaking about freedom of expression, we also want to get you talking on social media. Catch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Search for our handle @VOA Our Voices.
We've got videos and updates. Be sure to share our pages with your friends. Don't forget to use the hashtag VOA Our Voices.
Remember, we're also on WhatsApp, and the number is on your screen, so reach out to us and add your voice to our discussion.
As we go to break, we take a moment to remember fallen journalists, including some of our own colleagues. We'll be right back.
Like Voice of America on Facebook. Follow VOA on Twitter. Join VOA on our YouTube channel. Like, follow, join VOA.
Here with Our Voices, welcome back. We're joined by VOA Director Amanda Bennett to discuss the Free Press. She is a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist who sits on the board of the Committee to Protect Journalists. CPJ is an independent organization that works to protect and defend reporters across the continent and around the world. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you.
We're delighted to have you.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
We're very delighted to have you here. And with battles over truth, sometimes seeming to break out globally, I think most people would agree that a free press following the tried and true principles of journalism is important. But where does the Voice of America fit in this landscape?
I think we fit in the absolute dead center of that because that's what our mission is. Our mission is to provide objective, fact-based news and information to countries and places that don't have any other way to get it. So I feel like that we are part of the solution to this problem because what we're doing is broadcasting truth.
we take pride as the U.S. global media to export democratic values and, for instance, in the First Amendment law, freedom of expression. To what extent should we promote these values and still be mindful and respectful of countries' sovereignty, cultural values, and rights?
So that's really key. So what we're trying to do is broadcast accurate, truthful information. We're not trying to say change your religion, change your government, overthrow a government, don't overthrow a government. We're not engaging in any of those things. We're trying to tell the people in those countries what is actually happening, and to tell them what's happening from this point of view and from this point of view, often giving them, access to ways of looking at things that they don't have otherwise. So we're not trying to get into anybody's sovereignty. We're trying to broadcast accurate information.
Right. My question is on WikiLeaks' Julian Assange, who is known for leaking sensitive information globally. So what does his arrest mean for press freedom?
That's a really complicated question that has a lot to do with standards and laws and classified information. I think one thing all journalists around the world are looking at is what's going to happen to him and how will that affect press freedom, because even those who are kind of concerned about the actions he took would also be concerned about prosecution. And so I think it's a very delicate question for all of us.
Amanda, trust in the press has declined in recent years, and this is something that we as journalists are very aware of. Why do you think that is, and what can journalists do to regain that confidence in the public?
Well, I think we're all talking a lot about the kinds of, inaccurate and kind of sensational news that's being thrown around the globe, sometimes coming from real news organizations, sometimes coming from news organizations that aren't really news organizations at all. I think that serves to undermine the feeling of trust. Now, when I said VOA is at the center of this argument, our trust is actually staying the same or getting higher on average around the world, and that is including broadcasting into countries like Russia and China and Iran, places where we're actually banned from being. I think that's because we insist on reporting facts.
In terms of access, you mentioned now the challenge, because everybody has mobile phones and internet access, anybody could become a journalist. And so now the challenge is shifted to disinformation, or what some say fake news. Is that a challenge or an opportunity for VOA?
I clearly see it as an opportunity, because I think that we can see this among our own audience, that people during times of crisis, during times of stress, like the slow motion coup attempt in Zimbabwe, you can see people coming to us. They're coming to us because we're a trusted brand name that they can rely on. So I see that the people's distrust and fear about media and information actually draws people towards organizations they can trust.
Speaking of trusted names, VOA has been a very trusted name in Burundi. I've covered the country for about 15 years, but unfortunately, currently, we are banned in the country. We're not allowed to receive any reports. How do we circumvent that situation and still trying to reach to the people that have been really trusting to us in the past 20 years or more?
It's a great tragedy. I mean, you're absolutely right. We're incredibly important to Burundi. Burundi's audience is really important to us. So the fact that we've been banned from being there, that our reporters are banned from reporting there, that's a huge tragedy for the continent. It's not the first time VOA has been faced with this around the world. And what we try and do is we try and find alternate ways of reaching people, either by broadcasting from outside the country or by using digital means more often. So we try and find, when we get thrown out of a country, we don't just say, okay, we're done. We try and find other ways of reaching the population and of reaching out to the government and saying, this is not good for you or your people. So we're not giving up on Burundi. We're trying to find ways of improving the situation.
That's great. The Chinese have an enormous presence in the African media, and you have had a chance to work with the Chinese in the past. Given their history, what do you think about their presence on the continent?
So I think the presence in the continent is, something that the African countries themselves are going to need to have to judge. This is one of the things where I said, we don't say do this or do that. We're not saying accept China in or don't accept China in. But when it comes to the press, I've had a long experience in looking at the press, and it's wonderfully interesting to take precise views of Chinese view of the media. For example, you can put our live broadcast, for example, of Vice President Pence's speech up against the transcript that China released to its people. And there's a total difference between the two things. They didn't make up anything, but they took a whole bunch of stuff out. So when you start thinking about being communicated to by China, you have to remember they're giving you the communication that they want you to hear while we're giving you everything.
You know, you oversee hundreds of journalists at the Voice of America. Some of us are here at HQ, but many of us are around the world. Some of us do come from countries where reporting critically about the government can get us in jail. I'm just wondering, how do you manage that? I mean, I can imagine going to sleep some nights is hard for you.
It's probably the hardest thing for anybody who's running a global news gathering force. And the first thing I want to say is I am so grateful for the work of some of these brave people, because they're really the ones. It's not us here who are doing the hard work, it's them. And whenever we have any kind of issue like this, our first thing is to say to them, the number one concern is not the story. The number one concern is your safety. So we need to take whatever precautions we can to ensure your safety. We need to be able to be prepared to remove you from a dangerous situation. You mentioned the Committee to Protect Journalists. One of the things that the Committee to Protect Journalists does is to help not just protect journalists while they're working, but to try and get them out of trouble when they get into it. So that's something we all have to pay attention to because of the great debt we all owe to them for the hard work that they're doing.
And Absolutely. You've been on the ground, you've been in Nigeria, you've been in Central African Republic, you have spoken to reporters on the ground. What do they tell you?
Well, I mean, they talked to me about the difficulties that they have. Some of them, for example, in Uganda, I spoke to a group of journalists, all of whom had been physically harassed in some way. Mm-hmm. And so they talked about what that meant. And they talked about the difficulties in, getting to the people they want to talk to. So one of the big barriers to free press in some of these countries is that the officials that you want to talk to don't have the same sense of obligation that officials here do to communicate with their people. They have very hard jobs. And so when I've talked to journalists in these different countries, I've been very well aware of what they're facing.
And also, Amanda, this show, Our Voices, is crafted to empower women. Why is it so important to give women a voice?
Well, I mean, let's just think about it for a moment. It's 50% of the population of the globe. And if you disenfranchise 50% of the globe's population, you're losing 50% of the values. Not even to speak of women's own human rights to pursue a career, to work on things, to be listened to be respected. I mean, all those things are really important. And I'm thrilled by this show. I believe that speaking to African women from African women will help serve to show them what's possible.
What's been the hardest day for you as the VOA director?
I think that, there was a day within the last 18 months when we learned that one of our journalists in Somalia had been killed in a car blast, and realizing what we talked about before, that this was not a joke, this was reality, that people there were facing really, really serious things. And so knowing that somebody that was part of our organization had lost his life because of that really, really was a very difficult moment, I think, for all of us.
Yeah. It was. For the Africa division, it was really hard for us as well.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty much it. If there's anything you'd like to add about what press freedom means for our audience and for where we stand at VOA, maybe last word.
Well, I think it's absolutely true. There is nothing, I think, in the world that's more powerful than a free press in letting people know what's going on. Why do dictators and despots want to close down the press? That's because information is power, and they want to keep the power and keep the people from having the power. And what we're trying to do is bring the power back to the people by letting them see and understand what's really going on. I think a free press is absolutely critical.
I just loved in your op-ed in November when you wrote that our audience sees a country strong enough to criticize itself. I thought that was key.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, if you're a strong country, a strong person, you can take criticism and learn from it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's why we're here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Press Freedom.
And thank you for your work, all of you. Thank you.
Right. After the break, we introduce you to some women to watch. 2 female journalists risking their own safety in the pursuit of balanced reporting, and we'll be asking for your opinion on the importance of press freedom.
Welcome back. You're with Our Voices. Today, in our segment called Women to Watch, we're talking about women journalists who report on important topics in some of the world's most dangerous situations.
Here's a woman to watch who truly embodies what journalism can do to speak up for the most vulnerable. Nima El-Bagher is a senior international correspondent at CNN. A native of Sudan, her father spent the first 3 years of her life in jail for his reporting. El-Bagher tackles some of the most important topics in some of the world's most dangerous places. She exposed modern-day slave auctions of migrants in Libya and went undercover to document the tactics of human traffickers. She was the first international journalist to reach Chibok in Nigeria to report on over 200 schoolgirls kidnapped by Boko Haram. El-Bagher sets the bar high for all journalists and continues to shine the light of truth in some of the world's darkest places.
Another woman to watch is Karen Attiah. She is the Ghanaian, Nigerian, American global opinions editor at The Washington Post. In October, Attiah's worst fears as an editor were realized when one of her contributing writers, Jamal Khashoggi, went missing after walking into Saudi Arabia's consulate in Istanbul, where he was brutally murdered, according to reports. As The Washington Post reports, the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency later concluded Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman ordered the journalist's killings. Attiah is relentless in her fight to get her friend and colleague justice, demanding answers from Saudi Arabia as well as the White House.
Wow. You know, the Washington Post also translated his works from English to Arabic. And not only that, they also made it free to the public.
Absolutely. And Karen Attiah played a really big role in making sure that Jamal Khashoggi's voice continues even after his death.
That's awesome. Who do you think deserves a shout out? Use the hashtag VOA Our Voices and tell us who you think is a woman to watch in the field of journalism.
Also, be sure to watch Our Voices on the VOA website, where you can find the world's top news stories.
We leave you with a quote from Ida B. Wells, a famed investigative journalist and an educator in the American South who crusaded against the practice of lynching of African Americans and exposed the wrongs in society. She used her voice to say, "The people must know before they can act, and there is no educator to compare with the press."
And that's our final word for this week. On behalf of the Voice of America and along with my colleagues, thanks for tuning in to Our Voices. I'm Salem Solomon. Good day.